Hello and welcome to Who Dares Rolls TV. I am your host, Mike B, and today we'll be looking at Fantasy Flight Games, FFG for short, their Journeys of Middle-earth, Lord of the Rings game, big scope, big miniatures, adventure-y, app-driven game. We've given it a play, we've played the campaign. What do we think about it? Let's find out in this next installing episode of installment stuff. Exciting episode. The thing. So, we need to talk about FFG, Fantasy Flight Games. FFG's catalogue has always been drawn to licensed games, running parallel to their own in-house concoctions of bombast and spectacle, things like Twilight Imperium, Descent, things like that. For every Star Wars, there was always a Mission Red Planet. Alas, it is becoming more and more evident that FFG is morphing into Ocean Software. Now, for you younglings out there, that reference will mean diddly squat. I might as well have ruptured a few vertebrae, filleting myself for the obvious sea of blank looks that have just rippled across the internet. However, we are here to educate you, so let's stop and pause for a brief moment to have a brief potted history of UK's bustling homegrown software heyday. During the 1980s, Ocean Software was a powerhouse, releasing such innovative titles like Head Over Heels or the astonishing Whizball. And then they started gobbling up licensed properties like a Pac-Man with an overactive thyroid gland, regurgitating them in a production line of cookie-cutter knockoffs. It got so bad that towards the death rattle of their empire, that the differences between a Total Recall or a Hudson Hawk were barely negligible. They'd gone from the darlings of innovative game design and pushing the envelope to the worst kind of lazy developers, which probably accounts why they finally closed their doors sometime in the early 90s to little or no fanfare, and probably why most of you don't know what I'm rambling about at this point in time. So, that epic preamble out of the way, which is probably rather apt considering as we're about to discuss a series of books and films that are all about beginnings, endings and mini breakfasts and going on and on and on, that leads us to Journeys in Middle-earth, which along with a few other recent FFG releases have started to have more than a subtle whiff of an Ocean Software about them. So, with all that said and done, let's crack on. Let's have an overview. Let's start looking at it. Journeys is set in some vague time period before the movies and books. Yet, some notable characters pop up as playable and as supporting roles throughout the adventure you're going to be taking. Yet it kind of doesn't quite mesh. Essentially, this should be kind of taken as some extravagant form of fan fiction, I think is probably the best bit. If you're too much of a Tolkien purist and kind of really don't think too much about it, just kind of go with the flow. So, this game uses an app and essentially functions rather like the Tolkien-embellished equivalent of FFG's other literary cash-in Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. Let's pause for a second to run you through how all of that works. So players each select a hero who comes with their own deck of cards and some equipment and stuff and sorted bits and pieces relating to the class you've chosen for them. Now, at this point, you can go with what the app or the game directs you. So it will, for instance, Aragorn will be like a Pathfinder role. However, you could just as easily put him as a burglar or a musician, maybe. The choice is up to you. Whatever it does is it will deviate, alternate what the card decks are you've got and how they kind of function. You're free to mix that up as much as you like. The meat of the game will see you performing tests to accomplish feats of strength, agility, or wit. And to do this, you draw by drawing from your deck. For every success drawn, that's a success towards the task. So successes are shown as those icons like that. Some tests will have a specific number to hit, others to accumulate over time. So there might be moving a very large boulder may require you to have a couple of tests at it to reach the acquired platform to push the old boulder over. Now your deck is made up of 14 cards with only 4 of them actually having proper successes on them. Others of them have the inspiration symbol, looks like a leaf on them. So those can be converted to successes with an inspiration token, which are gathered throughout the game, either from exploring areas or completing or killing monsters or doing other stuff. You'll get them scattered around throughout. Combat functions pretty much the same way, other than your successes are spent on your equipment cards, which will then give you hits or other perks or abilities like group hits or fatal attacks or some other little tweaks and twists to that. And again, as you go through the game and upgrade equipment, more stuff becomes available. As you may have spotted, the cards also come with actions on them, so there's written text on the cards. Now, at the start of the game, at the very beginning, you have a rest period. It will allow you to do a rest or scout, I think the actual terminology is. You will scout some cards, usually 2 cards maybe at the start of the adventure. Often by the end, on the rest period, is usually only 1 card. But you'll scout these cards and you'll pull them from your deck. You have an options then to do them. You can prepare one of those cards down in front of you, which locks it in, allows you to use that text ability. And you can have up to 4 prepared cards in front of you of your character throughout the game. And then what you can also choose to do with those cards is choose whether you want to place them on top of your deck or place them beneath your deck. And that card play, the card play I've discussed, is kind of the core part of the game, and it's actually quite a lot of fun. I mean, you're essentially doing throughout most of the game is you're drawing cards, playing them off, and then at the end of a round you're going to shuffle your deck back up and draw again, and so on and so forth. It kind of comes down to the synergies of all your different characters, depending on how many people you're playing, because some of them will have all different perks at a certain point in time that maybe allow you to draw more cards as a scout action or rest or whatever. And it's understanding those decks, those individual little decks, and how they play to the strengths is kind of really the entertaining, the core part of the game. And it's quite interesting. It's kind of Gloomhaven light. I use the term loosely. There's no dice in the game as well. We might as well say that. All the combat is purely based on your successes and what you're doing. So there's no random in those regards other than that deck of cards. But there is at least a chance that you can kind of understand what's in it, what the chances of what's already come out and what's coming. But yeah, for me, of the whole of the game, that's the shining bit. This card mechanism and how you play it is very entertaining. It doesn't sound like it should be entertaining. You're essentially pulling cards, shuffling them back in and pulling and doing that. But actually, it's kind of satisfying as you play through the game. The most enjoyable part of it. And definitely as to the later half of the game, definitely the later sort of third of the game, once you've built that deck and you've got some really cool cards in there, that's really when that kind of really comes into its own and it becomes very enjoyable. I digress. So the app controls the whole campaign, including telling you what tiles to place down, what tokens to place on them. So you populate them. If you've played matches will make a great deal of sense. But essentially, you get different tokens. You get search tokens, which will be tokens you interact with, which will usually require you to solve a test, like we've discussed just a moment ago, to get something out of them. There's also people tokens, which you can interact with again, but usually they're going to have a conversation and nearly always involve either sending you off on a subquest or advancing the plot of the scenario you're currently in. And then finally you can get threat tokens on there, which again, interacting with, however, they will generate threat every round that they stay on the board. Good, that's all that's going to work. So that's it. The board will be spawned out by the app. It will tell you the rough gist of the scenario. Sometimes some scenarios will give you kind of drip feed you through, so it won't always tell you directly what you're doing. It might say go here to do this, and then once you accomplish that, it will then do the next point on. Other than that, that's pretty much how that's all going to function. Once the map's down and you're given a vague idea to do, then it's kind of the goal at that point is off you go. Go and do your thing. Then the turns are sort of broken down to really thing. You have an action turn where your hero can perform 2 actions, and they usually come down to either moving, interacting with something, or fighting something. That's pretty much what most of them are. So you can break up an action, so you can move, interact, then finish a move. Usually a move is 2 spaces on the board. Everyone will complete all their actions. There will be a shadow phase, which is where any enemies on the zone can move and do stuff if there's any on there, and threat will increase. Now, threat. Each scenario has a big, scary red threat bar. This advances each round. Your party will always generate threat. A group of 4 players will generate 7 threat. There's also threat markers, as we explained, will generate 1, and any unexplored areas also add 1 threat each round until they've been explored. At some points on this bar, there are markers, milestones, with a number that is triggered when you reach it. They will usually spawn bad guys on the map or other less savoury impairment to you walking around and having a breakfast. Now, anyone owning Mansions or familiar with Mansions of Madness will at this point be thinking, hold on, that sounds a bit familiar. Well, you'd be right. Essentially, this has re-implemented the gameplay and app integration of the game into a Tolkien setting. But in doing this, this feels like a slighter version of that game. Whereas the scenarios and mansions were enthralling, containing mysteries to be uncovered or puzzles to be solved, building to a satisfying and usually often fatal climax, Journeys is in such a rush to get on with the adventures that there's little time left to stop and smell the old Toby. And this is in part due to how the game handles each separate part of the campaign. A majority of your games will take part on a journey map. These see the play area spreading out across your table like a pool of malevolent marmalade as you explore, however, with the threat building each round and triggering more horrible events and other stuff, you kind of feel you're pushed, you're on this race to get through and solve a thing, to complete the campaign, complete the mission. You don't have a lot of time to stop. All of this seems in direct opposition to what Lord of the Rings is all about. Both the books and the films, I think we can all agree, have a pace that could at best be described as languid. No one was in much of a rush to get anywhere. There was lots of bumbling in hedgerows and stopping for up-tea mini breakfasts. In Journeys, before you pot the kettle on, half your party's fucked off over a hill and been murdered by a troll. It's fine once you're in that mindset, but definitely early game it feels worse, is that you're kind of pressured with this time limit and you're abandoning side quests. There's tantalising possibilities all over the place. You just don't have the time to deal with it, so you're just rushing on to complete a scenario. And while we're speaking about quests and items specifically, this game is really tight. It's part of what you enjoy about a quest is the loot and finding that stuff and leveling your character up, and yet this game feels a bit like a stingy uncle. Having touched on leveling up, there is leveling up. You gain XP and lore during your adventures, either killing monsters or searching these tokens will often give you lore. So lore is used to upgrade all your equipment in your pool, whereas XP can be individually used to upgrade your characters. So it allows you to switch cards out, to maybe upgrade cards to better cards or slowly add them. And you all do this via the app, so it tracks what you're doing. And that bit is cool. And it's great, but only really from the midway point of the campaign were we able to start doing this. And it almost feels too late in proceedings. I mean, we were unlocking stuff certainly, but your early game, when you are missing tokens and you are running through, you're maybe missing opportunities for lore and XP, but it still seems a long haul before you actually start getting rewards on that stuff. And let's be honest, the cool thing about adventure games, questing games, is leveling your character up. That's what we all love, getting more gear, leveling your character up, leveling your skills up. That's that buzz you get from that Warcraft-like crack addiction of one of these type of games is doing that. And yet this game seems to go to the direct opposite, to force you to play half the game before really you start getting any reward for what you're doing. That sucks a bit. And that's the game, really. Aside from battle maps, which we haven't really touched on, but aside from the journey, you get battle maps, which essentially are two boards that go down, usually with some scenario on there and some set decoration on there, which basically come down to you a chance to batter the utter shit out of some twatty enemy that's been annoying you for the last 3 or 4 missions. And they play out in this, again, usually with threat track running, but more of a confined area. So it's more those games then turn into like a mini boss battle often. Sometimes there's more quest related stuff, but that's kind of breaks them up, almost like chapter endings during the campaign as you play through. A quick word about death. So should your character ever succumb to their wounds, then you have a final chance to kind of res yourself. You tell the app that your character has expired via either damage or fear damage, and then you have to run a test. If you succeed that test, then your character bounces back up, rezzed miraculously. You discard all your face down damage and you crack on with your adventure. Fail it, sadly, is a problem. Once you fail one of these tests, and they do become increasingly harder as you res yourself multiple times, if you should find yourself doing that, once you fail one of these, then you have only to the end of that round to complete the scenario, or everyone fails. Now, that means a wipe for the whole party. We had a couple of situations where we were playing, and dear old Aragorn, who seemed to be like a pincushion, who was drawn to enemy swords, and he was on his second death or died, and it happened more than once, is he would expire. And there was one quest specifically where he died very early on, actually, in comparison to it. The rest of us were in fighting fit condition, were more than capable of completing the mission, yet the quest app failed us because we couldn't get to the final part of it. We were about a turn away from completing. Now, it's a tricky proposition because if there'd been death in the game and you were knocked out, a player knocked out could essentially be sat there for 20, 30, 40 minutes waiting for everyone else to do what they're doing. So I understand why they've done it. But when that happens, and it can happen, especially if you've played for your deck and your successes have run out and you're drawing dead and you've got no inspiration, there's a very, very good chance, even if you only need one success, your character's going to die. If that happens to the last player in the last part of that round, you're screwed. So I don't know what the solving that situation would have been, but yeah, it sucks a bit. It is a bit annoying, and we did fail a couple of missions with that exact scenario taking place. It's a compromise that they've made, but sometimes it really stings when the rest of your party is in a really good condition. We could have dragged his corpse behind us for a while. I don't know. But yes, who knows? There's no real solve for that one. That's the compromise they've made. But be aware of that. That can be a problem. So there you go. That's Journeys in Middle-earth. So let's get down to some final thoughts. Let's have an opinion. We've kind of cast some opinions liberally around like a body fluid at a bukkake party, but now we shall focus down squarely on it and give you some actual good hard facts and figures, maybe. So it's a tough one because actually the experience of the campaign was a lot of fun. The card play, which I mentioned before, and the tweaking your deck, really infectious, really good stuff. Really enjoyed all that. You know, how it works, it's a satisfying puzzle. It's got, as I say, a touch of a Gloomhaven feel to it. It's an interesting it's a way of doing it. That is fun. Some people may tune out entirely because essentially all you are doing is pulling cards, hitting success or not hitting success. But despite that being a pretty repetitive sort of process, it was quite entertaining, quite good fun, quite enjoyed that. I got into that and digged it. I digged it. I think overall there is a feeling of it all being a bit shallow. It's almost like the old eating a Chinese meal analogy, is that it's fulfilling at the time, but an hour later, yeah, kind of peckish again. So yes, with so much lifted directly from Mansions, it has to be said that the two games, Mansions is better, offering a satisfying story and puzzles to solve, whereas nothing in Journeys ever really immerses you into the story. It never really immerses you fully into Lord of the Rings. There is nods and winks to Tolkien and the stories, but you never really feel that you're in that environment and into that world. The threat mechanism always feels like it's nagging at you to keep moving, like an annoying parent. You know, keep up, keep moving along, stop, don't, what are you doing divvying there? It just feels like that. You never have a moment to kind of pause and kind of thought. And now some people enjoy that. I mean, there's other games like Imperial Assault has that time mechanism, but it doesn't feel quite so punishing. And so that's annoying. Kind of, we'd like a quest game to be able to quest. You can do it, and definitely late game there is an opportunity to do more of it, but early game is really annoying. It sort of brings me back to my opening ramble about Ocean Software. This feels like one of those games, a polished but ultimately sort of hollow or less fulfilling version of a better game. It's like a mixtape of FFG's greatest hits, repurposed with the kind of like a sprinkling of Lord of the Rings on top of it. It's in itself fun experience. Fans of the books or films, if you're like really engrossed in that, I'm sure will undoubtedly find a lot to enjoy. But there are better adventure games out there. Imperial Assault offers a much more satisfying dungeon crawl experience. Mansions is a better app exploration game. And then even if you're looking for your Lord of the Rings fix, then the LCG is a much better implementation and story building and storytelling version of that game than this. This all feels like pale versions of all of those games, but just kind of wispily bits of it stuck together. And all that said and done, Gloomhaven, a game that my group and we played non-stop for a year, still stands as one of our most treasured and enjoyed campaign games ever. And really, for the price tag, not far removed from what you're going to pay for this game, you do kind of have to go, oh, I know what I'd pick. So there you go. Journeys in Middle-earth. It's probably better called sprinting about in Middle-earth and twatting things. So there you go. That wraps us up for another thrilling instalment of Who Dares Rolls TV. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, or even maybe throw some money in Patreon. Who knows? We'll be back soon with some more reviews. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, go adventuring. That's tying it in there. Okay, we're done. Inspiration.